She couldn't bear children, so her family left her in the wood. Until the lumberjack, with 4 children, found her, somewhere near the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains, Montana Territory, winter, 1888. The fire in the drawing room snapped sharply, casting long shadows against the polished floors and velvet drapes. Snow had begun falling outside, the flakes thick and silent, muffling the sounds of the world beyond the grand estate. Jessica sat upright on the tufted settee, hands clenched in her lap, as Eleanor Caldwell, her mother-in-law, stood tall and grim beside the mantelpiece, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "If you cannot bear children, Jessica," Eleanor said coldly, "then what use do you have for the Caldwell name?" Jessica looked up slowly, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "I married your son because I love him," Eleanor scoffed. "Love does not secure legacy. Love does not inherit land or continue bloodlines. Love does not matter here." Jessica turned her gaze to the fireplace, hoping, praying, for Walter to say something. He stood at the hearth, swirling a glass of brandy, the flames flickering against the gold of his pocket watch. When he spoke, his tone was colder than the snow outside. "We married for legacy, Jessica, not for love. If you can't give the family what it needs, what's the point of keeping you around?" She blinked, stunned. "You told me once you'd love me even if we had no children?" Walter didn't look at her. He sipped his drink, then chuckled softly. That was before Mother explained how expensive barren affection really is. Jessica's breath caught. He stepped forward, placed the empty glass on the sideboard, and pulled off the wedding band from his finger. The metal clicked against the mahogany as he set it down. "Let's end this before you become a permanent embarrassment." She stared at the ring. A part of her waited for an apology, a glance, a word of remorse, but neither came. The housekeeper entered silently, eyes cast to the floor. She held Jessica's coat. No one said goodbye. Later, Jessica sat in the guest bedroom, where she'd once embroidered curtains and imagined lullabies. She stared at the pale walls, the untouched cradle tucked in the corner, and wondered when exactly her love story had ended. She never saw the hand that poured the powder into her tea. The world dimmed before she could cry. When she woke, the world was white. Snowflakes drifted past her eyelashes. Cold bit into her skin, burning her fingers and toes. She sat up slowly, breath fogging the air, her head pounding. She was in a grove of pine trees, deep in a forest she didn't recognize. Her coat lay crumpled beside her, dusted in frost. Next to it was a rough canvas sack. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, one wool dress, a pair of boots, her coin purse, empty, and a folded scrap of parchment. Jessica unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's. "Go back to where you belong." A sob caught in her throat, but it didn't reach her lips. She stood, legs trembling, eyes scanning the endless white stretching in every direction. No tracks, no road, no hint of where she had come from or where she might go. The snow began to fall harder. Jessica wrapped herself in her coat and began walking. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply moved forward, step after step, into the forest that had swallowed her. The wind howled through the trees and darkness came early. By sundown, her steps were uneven. Her fingers had gone numb. Her lips were cracked, and each breath came like glass in her chest. Her knees buckled. She fell. Snow wrapped around her like a shroud. And just before everything went black, she whispered the last word she remembered as home. "Walter." But only the trees heard her, and they did not answer. The wind was dying down as Luke Arnett trudged back toward his cabin, firewood balanced on one shoulder and a rusted axe in the other. The forest was still, coated in silver silence. He had learned to respect the quiet. It meant nature was watching. He stopped when he saw something strange beneath the crooked birch tree on the ridge. At first he thought it was just another snowdrift, but then he saw the shape. A woman, frozen, crumpled, unmoving. Luke dropped the wood and approached cautiously. Her skin was ghost pale, lashes rimmed in frost. Her lips were blue. Whoever she was, she had been out here too long. He cursed under his breath. Damn foolishness. Still, he knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Her pulse was faint, but it was there. He looked back through the trees toward home, jaw clenched. A voice behind him broke the stillness. "Daddy, she's not dead." His youngest, Eliza, stood at the edge of the woods, bundled in an oversized coat, mittens hanging from her sleeves. She looked at the woman with wide, pleading eyes. "Please?" she whispered. Luke exhaled slowly. "We don't take in strays." "She's not a stray, she's a lady." Luke closed his eyes a moment, then hoisted the woman into his arms. She was light, too light. He carried her down the trail, back toward the one place he had sworn not to open to strangers. The Arnett cabin was small but solid, nestled against the base of a rocky slope. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, 3 more children stared as their father kicked open the door with his boot and stepped in, covered in snow and burden. "A woman?" asked Micah, the oldest, frowning. "Where'd she come from?" "Found her in the North Woods," Luke replied. "She stays one night, that's all." He set her down on the cot in the small back room, the one that still held his wife's old quilt, folded at the foot. He didn't ask her name. He didn't take her boots off. He just stoked the fire, tossed in more wood, and left a pot of hot water nearby. Later that night, when the cabin was quiet and the children asleep, Luke returned to check on her. She was burning up, her face flushed crimson, damp with sweat. Her lips moved soundlessly. Luke muttered something under his breath, then fetched a damp cloth and wiped her forehead. Her body jerked beneath the quilt. "No," she whimpered. "Easy," he said, more gruff than gentle. Her eyes flickered open for a second, glassy, unfocused. She didn't see him, but tears streamed from the corners of her eyes. Luke paused, cloth in hand. He had seen women cry from pain. He had seen men cry from war. But there was something different in this, something quieter, deeper, loss without sound. He stood abruptly, walked to the kitchen, ladled soup into a bowl and brought it back. He set it on the table near her bed, then turned to leave. But before he walked out, he looked back once more. She was still crying, silently, lost in fever. Luke didn't speak. He just pulled the quilt higher over her chest, turned down the lamp, and closed the door behind him. Jessica woke to the sound of wind tapping against the glass and the creak of a wooden floorboard outside her door. For a moment she forgot where she was. Her throat was dry, her limbs stiff as boards, her back aching from the cold. But she was alive. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim morning light spilling through the frosted window. The room around her was quiet and unfamiliar. Bare wooden walls, sparse shelves holding only a few tins and folded cloths. A small iron stove crouched in the corner, its warmth faded but lingering. The only window framed a view of tall pine trees heavy with snow. The wind pushed against the panes with soft insistence, like a child knocking gently to be let in. At the foot of the bed, someone had placed a folded cotton dress. Plain, but clean. The kind of dress worn not for beauty, but for work. It wasn't hers. She sat up slowly, the quilt falling from her shoulders in a heavy slump. The movement sent a rush of dizziness to her head. Her feet hit the floor, and she winced, skin raw, cold still clinging to her toes like frostbite, waiting for a reason. Even so, she forced herself to stand, gripping the wall for balance. Each breath came with effort, but she wouldn't lie there any longer. Voices drifted in from another room. Children, laughing. Something bubbling, stew, maybe. A pan clanged to the floor, followed by a chorus of muffled giggles and one sharp shh. She hesitated at the doorway. Her hand hovered above the knob, her pulse quickening. What if they didn't want her here? What if the man who found her changed his mind? Before she could turn back, the front door burst open. Micah stumbled inside, dragging his younger brother Caleb, who looked limp in his arms. "He went to the creek," Micah shouted, breathless, eyes wide with panic. "Without boots!" Jessica's body moved before her mind caught up. She rushed forward, kneeling beside the boy. Caleb's face was bright red, his eyes glassy with fever. His teeth chattered and his small hands trembled in the cold. Wet clothes clung to his frame, his lips tinted slightly blue. "He's burning up," Jessica said. "He's soaked." She turned to the room. "Where's the firewood?" No one moved. Towels, boiling water, mint or thyme, anything. The children stared at her, like a ghost had started speaking. Eliza finally darted off. "I'll get the cattle." Jessica scooped Caleb into her arms. His skin was fire against hers, the contrast making her shudder. She carried him to the room she had just left, laying him on the still warm bed. Her fingers worked fast. She stripped off his wet clothes, wrapped him in every blanket she could find, then dashed back to the stove to stoke the fire. She found jars on the shelf, one with dried peppermint, another labeled wild thyme. She crushed the herbs between her fingers, releasing their sharp familiar scent, and poured boiling water over them. The aroma filled the room like a memory coming home. She dipped a cloth into the brew, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to Caleb's chest. Then she began to hum. It started low, tentative, a southern lullaby, old as memory. Her voice cracked at first, but she kept going. "Lay down, little darlin'. The storm's rollin' by. Mama's here with you, the stars in your eyes. Don't you cry, no, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing till the morning is nigh." Caleb's breathing slowed, his eyelids fluttered. Then, in a voice so soft she almost missed it, He whispered, "Mama used to sing that." Jessica's hands froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. Caleb reached out, his tiny fingers curling into hers. "I remember that song." She blinked quickly, pressing his hand gently. From the doorway, Luke watched in silence. His arms were crossed, his eyes unreadable, but his jaw clenched with something he didn't say. When Caleb finally drifted into sleep, Jessica brushed the boy's hair back and turned to leave. Luke hadn't moved. Their eyes met. No words, only that quiet, heavy gaze. Then he disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later he returned. He set a steaming cup of peppermint tea on the table beside her and walked away. No thank you. No apology. Just that small act. Wordless, warm, and full of meaning. More eloquent than anything she had ever been told. Jessica stayed. Not because anyone asked her to, but because no one told her to leave. Each morning, she rose before the fire was stoked. Her hands, once soft from city comforts, grew red and worn from snowmelt and soap. She swept the cabin floors with pine boughs, stirred oats over the hearth until they thickened, and scrubbed linens in cold basins while her breath clouded in the early light. Her movements were quiet, her presence gentler than the wind that moved through the trees. She trimmed Micah's unruly curls while he fidgeted, braided Eliza's hair with strips of ribbon torn from an old blouse. She mended Jonah's worn socks without asking, and showed Caleb how to tie his boots twice, so they would not come loose in the snow. She never imposed. She never asked for thanks. She simply stepped into the spaces that had remained untouched since the children's mother passed, filling the silence with the kind of attention that felt like sunlight through shutters. At first, the children called her Miss Jessica with hesitation, as if they were testing the name against the air. Then, with more ease, then, with affection, they began bringing her pine cones and smooth stones. Eliza tucked wildflowers behind her ear. Micah left half-eaten biscuits by her bedside. Even Jonah, who rarely spoke more than a grunt, began lingering near her when she read aloud in the evenings. Luke remained a quiet figure in the background. He chopped wood and patched the roof after the last storm. He hunted in silence, returning with rabbits and dried meat for the stew pot. But Jessica noticed things. Every few days someone had stacked fresh-cut logs just beneath the window of her room. Her fire never sputtered, her water bucket never froze, and when the handle on her washtub broke, it was replaced before nightfall, with a newer, smoother one carved by hand. Luke never thanked her. He never praised. But when he passed her by the hearth or handed her a tin cup of tea, his fingers brushed hers longer than needed. Not much, but enough. Then came the whispers. The town was small. Gossip grew like moss, damp and persistent. The lumberjack's hiding a woman out in the woods. She's probably some runaway. From the war? Or worse, living with 4 kids and no ring on her hand? Scandal. Luke heard it when he rode into town to trade pelts. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. But when the stores ran low and the snow began to melt, he needed to go back, this time with a wagon. Jessica stood at the door, arms crossed, shawl tight around her shoulders. "I'm coming," she said. "The children need new shoes." Luke hesitated. His eyes searched hers, unreadable. Then he nodded, once. The wagon creaked over thawing roads. In the back, the children huddled under blankets. Jessica sat near the front, one hand resting on a basket of dried herbs she had saved from helping neighbors. Town was loud, muddy streets, wagons creaking, voices shouting deals from windows. When Jessica stepped down, holding Caleb's hand, the street slowed. Conversations quieted, eyes turned, the woman with no ring. Too delicate, they thought, for the mountain. But she stood upright, and 4 children, cheeks wind-chapped and hands curled in hers, clung to her like roots to earth. Inside the general store, she helped Jonah choose pencils. She picked out sky-pew fabric for Eliza's new dress. She found a book of parables for Micah and examined a pair of boots for Caleb's small feet. At the counter, the shopkeeper squinted. "You the new Arnett woman?" Jessica smiled. "No, sir, just helping with the children." Then from the doorway, a high voice rang out. "Mama!" Caleb came running, a slingshot clutched in his hand. He threw his arms around her leg and looked up sheepishly. "I meant Miss Jessica." The room went still. Jessica blinked, but her face softened. She knelt and kissed the crown of his head. "It's all right," she whispered. Outside, Luke stacked sacks of flour into the wagon. A man nearby leaned against the post and snorted. "Looks like you've got yourself a new wife." Luke didn't look up. "She's not mine," the man smirked. "Sure doesn't look that way." Luke turned then. "She may not be mine," he said, voice low but steady, but she's the first good thing they've had in a long time." The man went quiet. When Jessica stepped outside, the children ran to her. Grubby hands, excited voices, clinging arms. She knelt to greet them, gathered them all close, and for the first time the townspeople saw her not as a scandal, not as a mystery, but as something far more sacred. Spring crept over the mountain like a hush. Snow receded into the pines. The creek began to murmur again, and buds stretched their fingers toward the sun. At the Arnett cabin, warmth no longer came only from the hearth, but from small things. Jessica's gentle hum while kneading bread. Eliza's laughter echoing through the trees. Caleb falling asleep with his head on her lap as she read aloud. It had been weeks since anyone mentioned where Jessica came from. Longer still since anyone wondered where she might go. One morning, Jonah returned from a supply run with a letter in his hand. The wax seal, still unbroken. "It's got your name on it," he muttered, handing it to Jessica like it burned his fingers. Jessica stood still. The seal was deep red, the handwriting elegant and unmistakably familiar. Caldwell. She felt her heartbeat slow in a strange, heavy rhythm. With careful fingers, she peeled it open, unfolded the paper, and read. "Jessica, Mother is dying. The family estate needs you, needs stability. You are still my wife in the eyes of the law. Return, and all can be restored. This family is ready to welcome you back. Walter." No apology, no warmth, just invitation under the guise of duty. Tucked inside was something else, a small velvet pouch. She opened it with a sense of dread. The ring, the same gold band Eleanor had stripped from her hand without ceremony, now returned like a summons. Jessica closed the letter slowly. All day she said nothing. She folded the note, hid it in her apron pocket, and went on as if the words had not shattered something quiet inside her. But Luke noticed. He always did. She caught him watching her that evening, his eyes lingering longer than they should as she stirred the pot over the stove. When she set the table, she felt the silence between them like a cold draft beneath the door. The children were quieter too. Eliza clung to her side while they washed dishes. Caleb peered at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Jonah didn't speak at all. Later, when the children climbed to the loft, Jessica stayed by the fire, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't read the letter again. She didn't need to. Luke sat in his usual chair, carving a small wooden rabbit. The flames crackled between them. Jessica pulled the letter from her pocket and unfolded it once more, holding it up to the firelight. Her eyes didn't move across the words. She wasn't reading this time. She was remembering. The cold marble of that parlor. Eleanor's voice like flint. Walter's indifference. The sting of the ring pulled from her finger. Luke glanced at her then. Just a flick of the eyes. But his gaze landed on the ring now cradled in her palm. He didn't ask, didn't press. He just went back to carving. Jessica stood. The room was still. The air smelled of cedar and ash. She walked to the fireplace. One by one, she tore the letter into even strips. The paper was thick, expensive, it resisted, but she kept tearing until it was unreadable. Then she dropped the pieces into the fire. They curled, blackened, disappeared. The ring came last. She looked at it for one long moment, the gold catching the firelight, before she let it fall from her fingers. It landed with a quiet clink, then vanished beneath the coals. Luke set the carving knife down. "Why?" he asked softly. Jessica turned. The fire danced behind her, warming her face, but her voice was steady and low. "Because this is the first place someone called me Mom." She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just sat down in the chair across from him, folded her hands again, and stared into the fire like it was the only home she'd ever known. Luke nodded once, small but sure. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Life at the cabin did not change all at once. There were no grand declarations whispered beneath the stars, no dramatic hisses against barn doors or sudden sweeping dances in candlelight. There were no wedding bells, no promises written in ink. There was only rhythm. Small, ordinary days, stitched quietly together, like a well-mended quilt. Luke began to build things, not for show, not for thanks. First, it was a small wooden table just outside the garden, carved with winding vines and foxgloves like the ones Jessica had planted in spring. She used it to sort seeds and dry herbs. Then came a new window frame beside the bed she once feared to sleep in, angled precisely to catch the slice of sunrise she said reminded her of Georgia mornings. One day, while stirring stew, she looked up to find a narrow shelf above the stove. It held her jars, peppermint, wild thyme, lavender buds, each one labeled in Luke's square, precise handwriting. He never said he'd built these things for her. She never asked. They did not speak of love. They did not speak of anything they could not hold in their hands. But their lives began to blend, slowly and without ceremony. Jessica no longer slept in the back room. It had started with a storm, one of those bitter spring nights where the wind howls through cracks like ghosts, and the cold comes not from snow, but from the memory of it. The window in her room cracked under pressure. Luke had stood at the threshold, silent, then simply pulled back the quilt on his bed. No words, no questions. She lay beside him that night, listening to the storm, her breath sinking to the rise and fall of his chest. She never returned to the other room. By mid-spring, there was no longer his space and hers. There was only theirs. They cooked side by side, sat together in the evenings, children sprawled around their feet. They took turns chopping wood, milking the goat, tending to the crooked rows of vegetables behind the cabin. She hummed when she washed clothes. He whistled softly when he worked the lathe. One afternoon, Jessica was kneeling beside the blackberry bush, trimming away the brittle vines that no longer bore fruit. She was focused, unaware that the thorns had broken through her gloves, working deep into her fingers. It was not until she saw drops of blood on the leaves that she paused. Luke saw first. He crossed the garden in 3 strides and crouched beside her. Without a word, he reached for her hand. She expected scolding, maybe a gruff, "You should have been more careful." But instead, he held her hand in both of his, gently. His touch was rough but steady. He began to pluck each thorn out, slow, careful, focused. When they were all gone, he brought her fingers to his lips and blew on the wounds to cool the sting. Then, wrapping her hand in soft cloth, he held it a second longer than needed. Jessica looked up. His face gave nothing away, but his hands did. They always did. That was how he loved her, not with promises, but with presence. Still, the mountain asked much of them. The soil was hard. The roof leaked with every storm. The children grew faster than their shoes could hold them. There was never enough sleep. Never enough quiet. Jessica gave more than she should have. She took in other children, taught lessons late into the dusk, helped with chores before the sun had properly risen. One morning, as she stepped into the yard to gather eggs, the world tilted. Her knees buckled. She dropped the basket and hit the ground hard, eggs breaking around her like pale suns. Eliza screamed. Luke reached her first. He lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all, carried her into the cabin, and laid her on their bed. He piled quilts over her, stoked the fire, barked quiet orders to the children, and sat by her side. She was burning with fever. There was no doctor for miles, no medicine but herbs and thyme. Luke never left the room. He cooled her forehead, spooned broth into her mouth, wiped the sweat from her collarbones. Near midnight, Jessica stirred, her lips parted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, weakly. Luke shook his head, voice low, grave. "You do not say sorry for giving more than you had to give." She reached for his hand. He took it and held it like something sacred. Then, after a long moment, he spoke the truth that had haunted him since the day he found her in the snow. "If you were my wife," he said softly, "I'd never let you be left in the snow." Jessica's eyes shimmered, not with pain, and with knowing, because somehow, even without vows or rings, she already was. By the time summer painted the hills in gold and green, the sound of children's laughter echoed far beyond the trees. Jessica had turned the forgotten corner of the cabin into something alive. She cleared the cobwebs, swept the floor smooth with pine branches, and nailed a broken piece of slate to the wall. Her fingers, blackened with soot, used charred sticks from the hearth as chalk. She taught from memory, scripture verses, folk stories, bits of poetry passed down by her grandmother, and simple arithmetic carved into the old wood beside the window. At first it was only Luke's 4. Then 2 more arrived, thin boys from the homestead over the ridge. Their clothes were patched, their eyes wary, but they listened closely when she read about courage and kindness. Then a girl came. No shoes, no parents, just 3 miles of dust clinging to her ankles and a stubborn glint in her eyes. "I want to learn my name," she said. "The real way, with letters." Jessica let her sit by the stove and gave her the warmest blanket. They sat on crates, straw bales, and old rugs. Jessica rang a makeshift bell, a bent spoon tied to a horseshoe, and began each day with a story that settled even the rowdiest child. Her voice, low and certain, wove through the timbers like birdsong. The mountain began to listen. Word spread, soft as wind through pine. The lumberjack's cabin had become a school. The Red Schoolhouse, they called it. named for the red shawl Jessica wore each morning as she stood at the door, bell in hand, smile ready. One afternoon, a bent woman from the Southern Valley arrived with a bundle wrapped in worn linen. She handed it to Jessica without ceremony. "My sister taught in Georgia before the war," she said. "Never had children of her own, but she taught 100. Inside the bundle was a silk scarf, pale blue, frayed at the corners, still smelling faintly of lavender. Jessica held it to her cheek, eyes misting. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she tied it into her hair as she read by candlelight, her voice glowing with gratitude. Then came the boy from the orphanage, silent, thin, wild-eyed. He said nothing for 3 days. Sat in the corner, arms crossed, watching the others read and laugh and trace letters in ash on wood. Jessica let him be. On the 4th day, as the class gathered their books and scattered outside, he stayed behind. He stared at the chalk for a long while, then walked forward, uncertain. His hands trembled. Then, suddenly, he opened his arms and reached for her. Jessica knelt slowly, unsure, until he wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face in her apron. "Mama?" he whispered, voice barely audible, cracking like thin ice. Jessica froze. The word hit her like thunder. Her throat tightened, her heart pressed against her ribs. Slowly, she bent down, gathered him close, and whispered into his hair, "I'm right here." Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. "I'm not going anywhere." A year had passed, though the forest seemed timeless. The cabin had grown fuller, not in size, but in soul. Where once there was silence, now there was music, laughter, bickering over spoons and books, bare feet running across wooden floors. The dining table had been rebuilt by Luke's hand, sturdier, longer. 8 chairs now stood around it, 4 for his children, 3 for the mountain students who had nowhere else to go, and 1 at the head, where Jessica always sat, carving bread and pouring stew with hands that once trembled but no longer did. No one asked why she stayed. She simply did. Luke, never one for words, had found other ways. One winter morning, Jessica stepped outside and found a wind chime hanging over the porch, delicate and charming, fashioned from old silver spoons. They clinked together gently in the breeze, each tone soft and distinct. She turned to find Luke behind her, watching quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Each spoon," he said, "is a thank you I never managed to say." Jessica didn't speak. He just reached up and touched one gently, eyes shining. Behind the cabin, she had begun carving names into thin planks of wood, each child who came through their door, each soul who found safety here. She nailed them to a great pine near the garden. The tree stood tall, like a living record of love that grew without permission. Jonah's name, Micah's, Eliza's, painted with hearts, Caleb's, beneath a carved bear. Then came the orphans, Sarah, Nathan, Ruth, and one small plaque just above the rest, Jessica's tree. When the snow returned and the world went quiet again, the cabin remained a hearth in the storm. There was no wedding, no paper, no preacher, but there were 4 bowls already set before Jessica sat down. There was a coat hung beside Luke's on the rack. There was a quiet hand that reached for hers when the wind howled outside, and that was all she had ever wanted. One evening, the fire burned warm and slow. Jessica sat in her rocking chair, 3 children curled around her feet. She read aloud from memory, fables, poems, stories stitched from her own heart. The children's heads drooped against her lap, full bellies and safe dreams. Outside, Luke worked at the woodpile, his breath white in the air, saw carving through the silence like a lullaby. The silver spoons above the door swayed gently in the wind, ringing out their quiet chorus. Inside the cabin, Jessica closed the book, kissed each forehead, and whispered, "Sleep well, my loves." The camera pulls back from the window. Warm light spills through the glass. The forest hums in quiet harmony. A voice speaks, soft, certain, true. She could not bear children, but she bore love, and that was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, if Jessica's quiet strength, Luke's silent love, and the children's laughter left something warm in your soul, then you're one of us. Here on Wild West Love Stories, we tell tales where love isn't always loud, but it always lasts. So if you believe that even in the coldest woods, love can still be found, hit subscribe, give this story a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Because out here, in the dust and the snow, love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, over and over again. We'll see you next time, where the heart still rides wild.